Hi, my name is Dr. Lysandra Cook, and I am a professor at the University of Virginia in the School of Education and Human Development within the Special Education program. I am really pleased to be working with Mindy today to talk about culturally relevant teaching and positive and instructive feedback. I am really thrilled to be a member of the Virginia State Chapter's Council for Exceptional Children's Diversity Committee, and to work with just the amazing teachers and other special educators here in Virginia. I'm super excited to be working with Mindy today, and her role as the Virginia Council for Learning Disabilities president is really important work, and I'm really glad to be a part of this collaboration between the Virginia CEC and the Virginia CLD. So our objectives today for this section that Mindy and I will be doing are to talk about culturally responsive teaching and that alignment with effective teaching, distinguish between different types of feedback, and recognize the differences between effective and ineffective feedback. But first, I want to start with a story. I want you to think back to first grade, either as yourself or as a teacher or as a parent. First grade, brand new school, a young girl transfers to a new school and almost immediately starts getting into trouble. The first grade teacher was a veteran teacher, respected, highly respected in the community as part of the school for over 30 years, as a leader in her church, and as just someone who had been so amazing in the school for so many years. And for some reason, this little girl and this teacher really had a hard time connecting. And the teacher consistently complained that the child was disobedient and that the mother was disrespectful and unresponsive. For example, the first week of school, the ball was kicked over the fence when the girl was playing outside with her new friends, and there was a tree over by the swings. So the little girl climbed the tree, jumped over, got the ball, and brought it back for her friends to play. The teacher was very upset, and the little girl was suspended from having recess for a week and told never to climb the tree again. So the next week, when the little girl came back to recess, she then, the ball was kicked over the fence again, and the little girl went out through the open gate and got the ball and brought it back. The teacher was furious. She sent the little girl to the principal's office for flagrant disobedience. And because the family had no phone at home, the principal and the teacher were very frustrated with their inability to get a hold of the mother, and would often send notes home through like envelope paper, clipped to her shirt, and the mother would be unresponsive, and often the little girl would get into trouble because the mother was unresponsive. The little girl did live with her single mother, her older sister, and occasionally a boyfriend or two of the mothers in and out, maybe not at the same time. The mother was a high school graduate. The father was mostly out of the picture, and he was in and out of jail and experienced bouts of homelessness. He had a 6th grade education and was currently living a good 200 or 300 miles away from the family. The mother recently had changed the living situation because they had been previously in a more communal situation. There had been some violence, and the little girl had witnessed the killing of one man by another man, and the mother had moved their living situation. After a number of issues, including the mother yelling and cursing at the principal when she had to miss work to come to school for issues that she deemed very minor, the little girl was expelled for the last quarter of the school year. The school allowed the child to come back to school in 2nd grade because of the advocacy of one teacher. That one teacher said, I know that this little girl can and do well in school. I know that I can work with her, and I can teach her what she needs to know to be able to function within the school community. So the school allowed the child to come back. The teacher not only held high expectations for this girl, but convinced her that school was important and could be a safe place, a place of joy, discovery, and community. The teacher explicitly taught her the school and classroom expectations and provided effective instruction. And from that year on, school was a safe place. It was a place of community and friendship and joy and learning. The little girl went on to graduate at the top of her class, was the first in her family to graduate college. She became a teacher, and eventually earned a PhD and is now a professor working at an elite university. And this little girl was me. That's me over here in the corner. And the teacher that changed my life, that believed in me and became the very kind of safe model, my champion, was a white woman that looked just like me now. And I think in me, she saw herself. She saw someone that could have been her child. And she believed that the difficulty I was having within school were not inherent in me, and that I was not performing as expected, and that she could make a difference in that. And that passion, that high expectation, that belief that you are not performing where you are expected to be performing, that you just haven't had the opportunity, the appropriate instruction, the right kind of relationship, the right kind of mentoring, is something that every single child deserves, no matter what background they come from. The Ed Equity Virginia, Education Equity in Virginia, if you have not been to their website, they have some amazing resources, some recorded webinars, as well as some other resources. And they also do a newsletter, so you can sign up at their website. They are coming from the frame that educational equity is achieved when we eliminate the predictability of student outcomes based on race, gender, zip code, ability, socioeconomic status, or languages spoken at home. And we are getting there for some children that look like me, that look like that little girl. Those children are more often given the opportunities to overcome the predictability of their zip code, their socioeconomic status, and even languages spoken at home, as in mine. And I didn't add in that story that I am also first-generation American. These predictive factors, we know what they are. We've known for so long, and we still are not doing a good job to make sure that we can eliminate those barriers and get rid of the predictability of places that you were born into. That is not what education is about. Every child needs a champion. Every child needs effective instruction. Every child needs to build positive relationships and understand that school can be a place of joy and learning. I do want to mention that poverty is not a culture. Trauma is not a culture. I experienced both poverty and trauma. Neither of those were the reasons that there was a mismatch between where I was coming from, my culture of living in a commune, having a very collectivist, a very student-centered or child-centered focus, coming into a school situation that was very much centered on the adults, especially back in that day. That was the mismatch. Poverty and trauma are not cultures. Disability, in some, there are disability communities and disability culture, but not everybody that has a disability views it as a disability culture. So we do need to be very aware. And there is often intersectionality where we do have students from diverse backgrounds that also are living in poverty, that also have experienced trauma, or that may also have a disability. So we do need to be really aware of the contextualization and all of the child and all of the that they bring to us at school. But we do want to make sure that we, even though some of the same practices will be effective for students that are coming from poverty, students that have a disability, students that are coming from trauma, as will for students that are coming from different cultures, they are not the same thing. What is culture? I think Richard did a really nice job early on defining it. Again, this is from Zaretta Hammond's work. Culture is a combination of thoughts, feelings, attitudes, beliefs, values, behavior patterns, and practices that are shared by racial, ethnic, religious, or social groups, and include surface, shallow, and deep culture. And I'm not going to go into it. I do think that surface culture is where we mostly focus when we're thinking about culture, when we bring into school settings in schools and we think about different diverse stories and sharing holidays or sharing food. But we do really need to be aware of the other levels, because as we go down more shallow and deep culture, those are the things that we need to understand about ourselves, because when a child presents and is reflecting a different culture from ours, that is where we might kind of have that, and we need to be able to self-regulate and really address that and make sure that we really are valuing and expressing through our actions and our words what we say we are when we are inclusive and we're accepting of students. So we really need to make sure there's an alignment between how we're responding and how we think we're responding. And sometimes that can come out of kind of our implicit bias coming through when there's a mismatch, and we need to be really self-reflective and also be students of culture from our students. We want to learn from our families. We want to learn, as well as taking the time to really teach yourself and learn and seek out opportunities to learn about other cultures. Cultural competence is the ability to successfully teach and or work with students who come from cultures other than one's own, or even sometimes one's own cultures, and the practice of recognizing differences among students and families and responding positively to those differences. I think as special educators, we are very well suited to look at differences through an assets-based lens and really recognize and build on the strengths. That's how we write IEPs, that's how we work with our students. We build from strengths and we move on. So we need to really recognize the funds of knowledge and the wealth of assets and things that people bring from their families that are different from ours that they bring to us. So we really do need to recognize these assets and use that assets-based model. Teachers and students, there are huge differences. So we have between 83 and 85% of teachers being white, the vast majority of those being white women. Students, we have 45 to 50% that are Alaskan, Indian, Alaskan Native, Asian, American, Black, or Hispanic. And the implications is there could be this huge, wide cultural gap between educators and students. So we need, as those white women, to recognize, or white men, recognize in every child the potential to learn. We need to be the champion for children that do not reflect back our own mirrors of our own childhood. We need to make sure that we are seeing the potential in every child that walks through our door. Culturally responsive teaching does lack a universal definition, which can cause some confusion. And I want to focus here on that responsive component, responsive, culturally responsive. Responsiveness is really, really important, but what does it mean? It means to react quickly and positively, to respond readily with interest and enthusiasm. Responsiveness connotes an openness, a receptiveness, an eagerness. Your children from diverse cultures will hear that in your voice, that genuine want to learn from them, that genuine connection, that genuine understanding and willingness to learn from them and to build relationships. They will hear that when you are responsive. Although these definitions are not specific to teaching, they do work for teaching. To be a culturally responsive educator means that we are quickly and positively responding with interest and enthusiasm to the cultures of our students. This is so important. You will be modeling throughout your day your embracing of inclusion and of diverse perspectives, of diverse cultures, of diverse abilities, of just the diversity that your children bring to your classroom. And that is really, really important. You can't kind of narrow down being culturally responsive teaching to, I'm just going to do culturally responsive practices right here in English language arts, and then throughout the rest of your day, not be responsive and respond in a way that really does look at the deficits that the student brings in and not embrace them. So you need to be really responsive throughout your day. An educator's ability to recognize students' cultural displays of learning and meaning making, respond positively and constructively with teaching moves that use cultural knowledge as a scaffold to connect what the student knows to new concepts and content in order to promote effective information processing. This is really important. So just because someone is approaching the instruction slightly different, you need to see that and build on it and make sure that you're scaffolding to connect what the student knows to this new information. So that contextualization is really, really critical. And the more you know your students, the more you are able to provide these kind of scaffolds and connections for your students. Responsiveness requires you to listen, learn from our students, learn what they tell us, what they bring us, what they show us in the classroom. Want to know more, have genuine curiosity about your children's perspectives and where they come from and what they value. Prepare ahead. You do need to be very well prepared. I think all teaching, as you all know, I'm sure, starts with that planning. Being well planned is going to really allow you to make sure you're being more effective, but also allow you to understand where you can deviate from the path and grab that teachable moment versus when you need to push forward through with your effective plan. Examine your own experiences and biases and be flexible, and also use effective practices. When we are connecting with students from diverse backgrounds, we are not forgetting what we know about effective teaching and learning. We need to, even more so. And if you are on Twitter, there are some amazing, follow the hashtag Black Literacy and really see that there is a community crying out for effective instruction. We know through the science of reading effective practices, they are not being applied always in some schools. And especially when we look at proficiency rates, we need to do better. We can do better. We need to believe that even when a child comes to us later, that they are capable of learning, and we need to use effective practices to teach them and not just expect, oh, look at their SES. Oh, their parents don't have any income. Oh, they're coming from a Black family. Oh, we shouldn't expect that they are able to read because of, look at all these predictive factors, look at all these risk factors. No, we need to use effective practices. We need to have high expectations. Many people think if you have a lot of multicultural books that will create conditions for equity in learning. Those are a great start. It's the belief that diverse multicultural texts create some kind of motivation that gets diverse students to engage and pay attention to the instruction offered. Many think having a multicultural classroom library makes them culturally responsive educators. It is magical thinking to believe that despite not knowing how long vowels work, when students see a brown face in a book, somehow that will be a catalyst and students will begin reading with greater fluency and comprehension. This is from a conversation with Zaretta Hammond on the Collaborative Classroom blog. And I think it is, oh, I'm missing the quotation marks at the end, just noticed my typo. Anyway, I think it really is true. I think we absolutely need to make sure there's a sense of belonging in our classroom. We have diverse books on the walls. We are books in our library. We present different stories. We are building that empathy muscle by connecting students to stories that are so different from their own, but also stories that are reflecting their own experiences. But we must not skip the step of using effective practices. I think, yes, and yes, create a sense of belonging in your classroom. Yes, reach out to your families, do home visits, build on the funds and knowledge that your students come in to school with, recognize that, do the work on yourself to recognize where you're coming from, and use research validated practices. It's a yes and. I think in some of the science of reading debates going back and forth, is it the knowledge more important or the early decoding? And I, again, in that component say yes and. Both are really important. We can do both things. We can have a classroom that truly reflects the diverse nature of our student population, of our community that our school is situated in, and we can use evidence-based practice or practices grounded in the science of learning. So this is a chart from Zaretta Hammond's, the collaborative classroom conversation with Zaretta Hammond, that I really love, and I think it brings things into play very nicely. The differences between multicultural education that focus on celebration of diversity, absolutely important. Centers around creating positive social interactions across differences, really important. Diversity and inclusion efforts live there. And I think that's sort of where many of us go, but unfortunately some of us stop there. It concerns itself with exposing privileged students to their diverse literatures, multiple perspectives and other cultures. For students of color, the focus is on helping them see themselves reflected in the books and curriculum, and that social harmony lives there. It's really important. Social justice education focuses on exposing the social political context that students experience. It centers around raising student consciousness about inequity in everyday social, environmental, economic, and political situations. And I think social justice has been rising to the forefront right now with our current political climate. Anti-racist efforts live there. They are so very important. But in and of itself, that perspective concerning itself with creating the lens to recognize and interrupt inequitable patterns and practices in society, critical consciousness is really very important and is partially a bridge to the next component of culturally responsive education. Focuses on improving the learning capacity of diverse students who have been marginalized educationally. It centers around the affective and cognitive aspects of teaching and learning, and the efforts to accelerate learning live there. That is really, I think, in teacher education, when we have shorter and shorter programs, we have so many vacancies, we need to push teachers out there more. We are focusing there, but I think sometimes at the detriment to others. Although I will say in my own teacher training programs, we stopped at multicultural education. And when I got into the classroom, I said, well, I got all these great books, but none of my kids can't read them. And I needed to also make sure that I was taking the right steps to make sure I knew how to accelerate learning. It concerns itself with building resilience and academic mindset by pushing back on the dominant narrative about people of color. Independent learning for agency lives there. So we do need to use effective practices. We do need to make sure we are culturally responsive and not at the detriment to the other areas and not leaving the other areas. This is a yes and. And so Mindy's going to go forward and talk about effective feedback. Screen.
There we go. Awesome. Okay. All right, I think we're good. I usually have people for this. Lisa is usually my people, so let's hope this works out. I would like to thank Lysandra for her amazing presentation. Very riveting. Thank you for sharing that first grade story. Oh my God, I was in tears. You obviously are a remarkable woman, and we're very lucky that you took the time out of your busy schedule to do this presentation. So thank you very much. I would like to take a little different look at culturally relevant teaching. I know as teachers, you've probably been in a lot of webinars, a lot of PDs, a lot of PLCs regarding cultural diversity, culturally relevant teaching, the books to use, the words to say. So I'm not really going to teach you a new concept. I'm just going to maybe help you piggyback on what you already know and up your game a little bit. At least that's the hope. So to that end, the Cedar Center and the Council for Exceptional Children have released a set of high leverage practices for special education. These are 22 practices, and they're divided into 4 areas: collaboration, assessment, social, emotional, behavioral, and instruction. These practices are what we should be teaching our university students. So when our students graduate college and go into the classroom, they should be very proficient in implementing these high leverage practices, as should current teachers. So the high leverage practice that I'm going to talk about today, excuse me, is provide positive and constructive feedback to guide students' learning and behavior. Before I start talking about feedback, though, I want you just to take a minute and think about your classroom environment. We need to create a safe space for all of our students in our classroom, but particularly for our culturally and linguistically diverse students. So think about your current classroom and whether or not the physical setup of your classroom is an extension of your personal worldview or of the dominant culture, or do you think it's a culturally responsive classroom? I was a special education teacher for 18 years. In the last 9 years, I was a co-teacher in 4 different classrooms. And I have to say, I do not think we had a culturally responsive classroom. You know, we had the library with the right books. In February, we put up a special Black History Month bulletin board, but that was about it. And that's really embarrassing for me to admit that. And certainly if I had a chance to go back and do it again, I would definitely change things. But I really believe that my classroom environments were not culturally responsive. I don't know how many of you have had the opportunity to use these multicultural crayons or construction paper, but they're brilliant. And I highly recommend giving those a try in the classroom when you have an activity for students. I would like to remind you that feedback isn't just about right and wrong. Sometimes we get stuck on the right and wrong, but there's much, much more to feedback than just pointing out what students did correctly and what they did wrong. So research indicates that our underserved English learners, poor students, and students of color routinely receive less instruction in higher order skill development than other students. They're taught less challenging and more repetitive curriculum, and they're taught cognitive skills low on Bloom's taxonomy. For instance, we might teach them the understand, remember cognitive skills rather than evaluate and create. But here's the thing. These students struggle not because of their race, their language, their poverty. They struggle because we as educators don't give them sufficient opportunities in the classroom to develop higher level thinking skills, to develop the cognitive skills and the habits of mind that they need to prepare them for increased rigor, to prepare them for the more academic tasks that we should be giving them. So it's really on us as educators. Why is feedback especially important for culturally and linguistically diverse students? Well, we have to close that gap. So this is what the student understands. This is what we taught. There's a huge gap. So somehow we've got to close that gap for our students. We need to expand their learning. And one way we're going to do that is by teaching them higher level concepts, going higher on Bloom's taxonomy. And we're going to reinforce expectations, meaning we're going to let them know that we have high standards for them and we know that they can achieve whatever goal we set for them. I love this statement that feedback is an essential element in the culturally responsive teacher's arsenal because it's so easy to do and it's so powerful and so performance changing if done right. Hattie and Timberly state that feedback is one of the most important tools we have to improve student learning, and it's free. I mean, you gotta love that. People develop a greater sense of I can do it when they're able to confirm they are making progress toward their goal. So I want you to think back to yourself in February, March. You were either a student going to virtual classes or a teacher learning how to teach virtually. And you were probably a hot mess back then. But over the last 8 months, you've had the opportunity to develop your virtual teaching pedagogy, and you've gotten better about it. You've gotten better at it. You're more savvy. You have an I can do it attitude now. You might not have an I like it attitude, but you have an I can do it. You know that you have achieved something really great. So that's that attitude, that I can do it attitude is what we need to instill in our culturally and linguistically diverse students. Simply giving feedback doesn't change one thing. The students have to accept it as valid and it has to be actionable. You need to tell students what to do with the feedback that you give them. But here's the thing. For feedback to be effective, students must act on it. So you can give the most powerful, most brilliant, best feedback on the planet, but if a student doesn't act on it, it's a moot point. So how do we get students to act on that feedback? Well, that's through our relationship that we build with the students. They, a relationship of mutual respect. So when you give them feedback, they will accept it as valid. They know that you have their best interest in mind, and then they will act on it. So it's all about relationship building as well. Quality feedback does have some distinct characteristics. It's instructive rather than evaluative. So we're going to focus on correcting one aspect of their performance, a procedure, a step, something that they need to memorize, and it needs to be actionable. Tell them what to do with that feedback. What is the next step after they get your feedback? It is specific and in the right dose. We're going to focus on only 1 or 2 points, not 27. We're not going to overwhelm them. It's timely. So we know that written feedback isn't always timely. Seems as educators we're perpetually behind on our grading. But verbal feedback can be immediate and should be immediate. And we want to give that feedback while the lesson is fresh in their mind. And it's delivered in a low stress environment. I love the idea of reframing errors as information. So by doing this, I think that we're taking away the negative connotation of an error. You can set the tone in your classroom that you're the teacher and it's your job to give information about something when it's incorrect. So the emphasis is on you giving information rather than the student making an error. You're just changing the paradigm a little bit, and I love that idea. So there are different types of feedback. Obviously, the instructive and corrective feedback is the gold star. For example, in the third sentence, use the wrong punctuation and have a run-on sentence. Or when you're adding 2 columns of numbers, you're forgetting to carry the number over. I would even go a step further in both of those examples and add an actionable statement. For example, in the third sentence, use the wrong punctuation and have a run-on sentence. Hey, listen. Remember, a run-on sentence is a really long sentence, so you want to try to break it into 2 smaller sentences. Or when you're adding 2 columns of numbers, you're forgetting to carry the number over. Make sure you're lining up your numbers, and I can give you graph paper if you need it, and that will help you remember to carry your number over. So as educators, we give a lot of evaluative feedback, good job, nice presentation, and I'm not suggesting that we shouldn't continue to do that. I'm suggesting that we expand on the feedback that we're already giving students. Good job. I really like the way that you blah, 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 and then you give them an action statement as well. So you're giving specific feedback that's actionable. There are other types of feedback. So the research suggests that students of color often do not receive timely, actionable feedback from teachers. Why? Well, the teacher doesn't want to hurt the student's feelings. I mean, we're educators, we are softies. I absolutely get that. I do think that the second bullet is probably more important. The teacher does not want to be perceived as prejudiced by pointing out errors to our Black and brown students. They don't want to be the teacher, the prejudiced teacher. So instead we give what is called cushioned feedback, and we downplay the errors that they made. And when we do this, we're really giving the students a disservice because we're not showing the students that we have high standards for them when we downplay the severity of errors. Essentially, we're saying, yeah, we thought you were going to fail that test and you did, so that was what we expected. So you are not setting the bar high at all. And we're not giving them any actionable information to be able to change their behavior and improve their performance. So cushioned feedback is not effective feedback. Consider instead giving wise feedback. In wise feedback, the teacher, first of all, conveys to the student that they have faith in their ability to achieve whatever the teacher has asked them to achieve. And then they're going to be honest. They're not going to sugarcoat the feedback. They're going to be honest about the gap between the current performance and the standard he or she is trying to achieve. So you might say something like, this is where you are right now, this is where you need to go, and I'm going to help you get there. Okay, so we're not going to sugarcoat the fact that they did better than they did. 3 specific elements are added to the negative feedback: an explicit holding of high standards. I cannot emphasize enough how crucial that is. A personal assurance to the student that he or she is capable and can improve with effort. So remember, you're building relationships, and if you have a good relationship with your student, when you personally assure them, that will go a long way toward making them want to work hard for you. And then specific actionable steps to work on. So an example of wise feedback may be something like this. I know that completing decimals, percent, and fractions is a hard thing for a 6th grader. You missed most of the fraction problems on the test. I know if you take the time to draw fraction circles or fraction bars, you can do better next time. You've got this. So that would be an example of wise feedback. Seems really long, but it probably took me 10 seconds to read. Just a reminder that effective feedback is respectful and positive. I know for a fact I've been guilty of the non-example, and I probably punctuated my non-example with an eye roll because I'm an eye roller, which is incredibly disrespectful. So we need to check ourselves. and make sure that we are being respectful and positive for our students. And feedback is not just individual feedback. We can also give feedback to groups of students, and we should. So this is an example of what some group feedback might look like. I noticed you guys are working together to solve the problem. I heard lots of scientific language and reasoning and strong collaborative language. Remember, someone needs to write your reasoning down. So you have just given them specific feedback and an action to perform and told them they're great. So I would like for you to think for a moment, how many positive statements do you think we should make for every negative statement? I'm going to give you some wait time, some think time. Give you 5 seconds. All right, if you said 5 positive statements for every negative statement, you would be correct. Here's the thing, the brain has what is called negativity bias. And that means that the brain is more focused on negative experiences than positive experiences, actually 20 times more focused on negative experiences than positive experiences. So it's in our brain that we are negative. So we have to change that paradigm, and we have to really make a concerted effort to be more positive with our students, and probably in our lives, just generally speaking, to be honest with you. So in conclusion, a culturally responsive teacher builds meaningful alliances with their students. So through the classroom environment, through the relationship building, you are building trust in a comfortable relationship with your students. Is mindful of balancing rigor and expectations with supports. We are going to up their game. We are going to teach them at a higher academic level, as we do our other students, because they deserve that. But we are also going to provide scaffolds to help them achieve the goals that we've set. So we're going to be scaffolding them along the way. We offer actionable feedback and feedback in ways to affirm students' capacity to learn. We know that they can do this. We are inspired by them. We are excited for them. Just keep building that confidence. And we're also going to add feedback that is honest about the student's performance. We're not cushioning it. We're not sugarcoating it. We're going to just tell it like it is. And if we have a good relationship with our student, they will understand exactly what they need to do. So we don't have a live chat or shout out, but I thought the examples were pretty good, so I left them in the presentation. Emilio just used mathematics language. He used quotient to try and solve a math problem. I always got excited when my students use vocabulary in science or social studies or math, but his answer was incorrect. So what kind of feedback, what might you say to Emilio using the types of feedback that I have mentioned previously? Your feedback might look something like this. Emilio, I like the way you used the word quotient when you were talking about your answer. You almost got the correct answer. You were just off by 2. Division's a really hard math concept to learn for sure. Make sure you keep all of your numbers lined up so when you subtract, you get the right remainder. So you told them what you liked, you were specific, and you gave an action to complete at the end. So in this example, Kanisha didn't make any mistakes. She correctly lined up the decimal points and arrived at the correct answer. So her feedback might look something like this. Kanisha, I really like the way you remembered to line up the decimal points carefully. You got it just right. I also am so happy that you remembered to look to see if there was more on the floor to figure out if you had to regroup or not. Don't change a thing. So your actionable statement actually is don't change a thing. You continue doing what you are doing because it's perfect. So Lysandra and I wanted to share some resources with you. On the left, the Culturally Responsive Teaching in the Brain is the book that the Virginia CEC Diversity Committee read. It's really a great book, and it's short. It's only about 150 pages, and it talks a lot about why we do the things we do based on our brain, which is fascinating, but it also gives many practical applications for the classroom. And actually I used a lot of it in my presentation. So I highly recommend that book. And then these are just some other resources that are available to you. So please check them out. I would like to thank you all for listening to Lysandra and me, and for supporting Virginia Council for Learning Disabilities and the Virginia Council for Exceptional Children's webinars. And we hope you learned something. Have a great day.